A frail war hero is shoved violently by a reckless biker, collapsing amid gasps and stunned silence. Pain and humiliation flash across his face as the crowd's anger ignites. But before justice can be served, a rumble shakes the street, and an old brother-in-arms arrives with a mission that changes everything. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air, once peaceful and tinged with the soft rustle of spring leaves, now hung heavy with disbelief. Henry's veteran's cap, a symbol of decades spent defending others, was knocked askew, and his jacket, worn but proud, brushed against the cold pavement as he teetered dangerously. Every eye in the park locked on the scene, some frozen in horror, others flickering with outrage. Henry's breath came shallow, the sting of humiliation sharper than the ache in his body. Jake, the young biker, revved his engine again, the harsh noise cutting through the murmurs like a blade. His leather vest bore patches, too, but these told a different story, one of bravado, defiance, and reckless youth. He glanced back at his gang with a cocky grin, soaking in the admiration he craved. In that moment, Jake wasn't a thoughtless brute. He was a kid desperate to carve out an identity, desperate to be seen, and his recklessness was a misguided cry for respect in a world that often dismisses youth unless they scream loudest. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They saw the damage, not the motivation. An elderly man, fragile yet dignified, shoved aside like an obstacle on a racetrack. Mothers pulled their children closer. Old men frowned, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The collective shock transformed swiftly into simmering anger, an anger that was as much about the blatant disrespect as it was about a society losing sight of honor. Mary, Henry's closest friend and longtime confidant, stepped forward, her voice breaking through the noise like a beacon. "That man deserves respect," she repeated, each word heavy with the years of shared memories and unspoken admiration. Her eyes locked on Jake, blazing with righteous fury that no age could temper. She wasn't just defending a man, she was standing up for every forgotten promise of gratitude owed to those who served. To her, Henry wasn't just an old man. He was a living testament to courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Henry's hand instinctively went to his hip, wincing as the pain spread, sharp and unwelcome. Yet his pride wrestled with the ache. The special forces had drilled into him a refusal to show weakness, a code that valued strength even when the body betrayed it. His mind flashed back, not to this moment, but to harsher days, to missions in hostile lands, to sacrifices made in silence. How cruel it was that after surviving battles overseas, he now faced a war of respect on his own soil, fought against apathy and disrespect. The park's ambiance had shifted. It was no longer a place of simple leisure, but a battleground of emotions. Murmurs turned into whispered condemnations, and tension thickened the air. Some bystanders clenched fists, others shook their heads, silently vowing that this injustice would not be overlooked. The scene was more than a physical shove. It was a collision of values, a stark reminder of the fragility of honor in a world rushing past the past. Jake's gang revved their engines once more, impatience simmering beneath their bravado. Their laughter, sharp and loud, clashed awkwardly against the rising tide of indignation. They had expected submission, silence, maybe even admiration for their wild display, but instead they were met with a community unwilling to tolerate such blatant disrespect. Henry straightened slowly, forcing himself upright despite the sharp reminder from his injured hip. His voice, when it came, was low but steady, tinged with the weight of years and an unyielding spirit. "I fought for this country," he said, eyes meeting Jake's for the first time, "and for the right to walk these streets with my head held high." The words hung heavy, loaded with a lifetime of sacrifice and pain, a stark contrast to Jake's youthful arrogance. For a moment, the biker's cocky smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. This was no ordinary man. This was a warrior whose scars ran deeper than skin. The crowd's anger swelled, now fueled by respect and protective fury. This wasn't just about a shove anymore. It was about defending the values Henry embodied, about standing up against the careless dismissal of a hero's dignity. The tension crackled like static in the air, thick with the promise of consequences yet to come. Pain settled deep inside Henry Collins, not only the sharp sting in his hip, but a far heavier ache, one that no painkiller could touch. The shove from Jake was a brutal reminder that the battles he'd fought decades ago hadn't truly ended. They only changed shape, moved from foreign deserts and jungles to the quiet streets he called home. Memories surfaced unbidden, gunfire ripping through the night, the faces of comrades who never returned, the weight of command in moments when failure meant death. Each recollection was a silent scar beneath his skin, invisible but raw. And now that same rage, frustration, and helplessness surged anew, threatening to overwhelm him. The world seemed colder now, colder than the wars that had once demanded every ounce of his strength. He had given everything, youth, health, years of his life, to protect ideals, only to be shoved aside like refuse on a sidewalk. Despair crept through him, unbidden and unwelcome. For a fleeting second, Henry wondered if the price of his sacrifices had been worth it at all. Was this the respect owed to those who bled for their country? To those who returned not as heroes, but as forgotten relics? The bitterness of that thought sank deep, threatening to root itself in his soul. Yet beneath the weight of humiliation, beneath the searing pain and the sting of loss, a flicker of something else ignited. It was small, almost imperceptible, but persistent. Hope. The hope that this moment was not the end of the story, but merely a catalyst for something greater. The hope that honor was not dead, that loyalty endured, and that respect could still be reclaimed. That hope arrived without fanfare, but with unmistakable force. The distant rumble of an engine, powerful and deliberate, cut through the thick tension like a clarion call. It grew louder, closer, reverberating through the streets until a military-style truck emerged, a beast of steel and resolve, unmistakably rugged and commanding. Its arrival shattered the uneasy quiet, drawing eyes and breaths alike from every corner of the neighborhood. At the wheel sat David, a man whose presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Once Henry's squadmate, a brother forged in the crucible of war, David's face was weathered but sharp, his gaze steady and unwavering. Retirement had softened none of his resolve. His body carried the lean strength of a man still prepared for battle, and his posture radiated a quiet authority born of hard-earned experience. The Veterans Network had spread word of the morning's incident, and David had come, purposeful, unyielding, ready to stand as the bulwark between injustice and the man who could no longer fight with fists alone. David's motivation was carved from years of unbreakable loyalty. His life's code was simple: protect your own, especially those who had sacrificed everything. He understood that battles did not always unfold on distant fields under gunfire. Sometimes they were fought quietly, in streets where respect was challenged by reckless youth and societal apathy. This was one such battle, and David would face it with the full weight of his presence, a living reminder that honor was not negotiable. As the truck rolled to a stop near the park, a ripple of anticipation spread through the gathered crowd. The air, thick with past tension, began to pulse with renewed energy, as if collective breath was being held in expectancy. The onlookers sensed the turning of a tide. This was no ordinary confrontation, but a reckoning, the emergence of a force that refused to let injustice stand unchallenged. Henry's pain, though still sharp, was now tempered by the strength of this arrival. The weight on his chest lightened imperceptibly, replaced by the steady, reassuring presence of a brother in arms who understood the language of sacrifice and respect without needing words. Together they embodied the legacy of a generation that had fought not just for land or flag, but for the dignity owed to every man and woman who had worn the uniform. The moment stretched taut with possibility. The quiet resolve in David's eyes spoke volumes. This was more than a visit. It was a summons to accountability. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, charged with hope and a burgeoning sense of justice. In the midst of lingering pain and the shadows of past wounds, Henry Collins glimpsed a promise that his fight, far from over, was entering a new chapter, one where honor might be reclaimed and respect fiercely defended. The park, once the scene of an ignoble shove, had become the stage for a reckoning long overdue. And in that charged stillness, Henry's heart beat steadier, fueled by the knowledge that he was not alone. The warriors who had stood with him in distant lands were here still, unbroken, unyielding, and ready to remind the world that some debts of respect were sacred and unassailable. David stepped from the truck with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced death and returned unbroken, his every movement deliberate and measured. His eyes swept over the gathering crowd, landing on Jake and the rough-knit gang of bikers who still lingered like a storm cloud hovering over the park. There was no bluster in David's approach, no empty threats or blaring bravado, only the weight of undeniable truth carried by decades of service and sacrifice. The air grew heavy with expectation, the tension palpable as he closed the distance. "You don't get to disrespect those who served," David said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "That man fought for your freedom, for all of us." The statement was simple, but carried the gravity of experience, the voice of a man who had seen what it cost to defend a nation and who knew the value of honor better than anyone. Jake's swagger faltered under that gaze. His earlier arrogance, born of youthful recklessness and the desire to prove himself, began to crumble. The bikers shifted uneasily behind him, their bravado dimmed in the presence of a veteran whose words bore the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned every syllable. Jake tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, a fragile defense against the weight pressing down on him. David didn't raise his voice or issue threats. Instead, he spoke with the quiet power of lived history, recounting missions shared with Henry. Harrowing nights spent in hostile territory, moments when survival hinged on trust and courage, the bitter taste of loss when brothers fell beside them. His voice wove a tapestry of sacrifice and unbreakable bonds, drawing the crowd into a world few could imagine, but all could respect. He described the camaraderie born not from easy days, but from the crucible of danger, the unspoken code that bound them together beyond rank and time. He spoke of Henry's unwavering dedication, the strength beneath the veteran's frail exterior, and the dignity with which he carried the burdens of the past. With each word, the chasm between Jake's reckless ignorance and the profound reality of true service widened. The bikers, once a unified front of defiance, began to dissolve like shadows at dawn. Faces that had worn masks of menace now showed hesitation, doubt, even shame. Jake stood alone, stripped of pretense, caught in the uncomfortable truth of what he had done, not just the physical shove, but the deeper blow to a man who deserved reverence. Around them the crowd shifted from stunned silence to murmurs of approval. The atmosphere transformed, crackling with the energy of collective awakening. It was a reckoning not just for Jake, but for every bystander, a reminder that respect was not an abstract notion, but a living, breathing necessity. Henry, steady now with Mary and David on either side, reclaimed his posture. The pain in his hip lingered, but it was overshadowed by the resurgence of his spirit, a fire reignited by the solidarity around him. His eyes, sharp and clear despite the years, met those of the crowd, reflecting a quiet pride that needed no words. The applause rose organically, swelling into a chorus that echoed through the park, not a fleeting gesture, but a communal declaration. It was a salute to endurance, to dignity, and to the unyielding principle that cruelty and disrespect would not go unanswered. This was a moment of shared victory, a testament to the power of standing together for what is right. David's presence had not only confronted the injustice, but had rekindled a sense of purpose within the community. His quiet strength reminded everyone watching that true power lies not in aggression or bravado, but in steadfast honor and the courage to defend it. The respect given to Henry was not just about one man's past. It was a beacon illuminating the path for future generations. In that charged stillness, Henry's story transcended the personal. It became a symbol, a rallying cry that in a world too often indifferent or quick to forget, there remain those who will stand tall, who will fight to preserve the dignity of their brothers and sisters in arms, and who will inspire others to do the same. The park, once a stage for humiliation, had become a sanctuary of triumph and inspiration. The crowd dispersed slowly, carrying with them a renewed sense of justice and a solemn vow never to let such disrespect pass unnoticed again. Henry, with the quiet grace that defined him, turned his gaze toward the horizon. The fight for respect, the battle to honor sacrifice, was far from over. But with friends like David and a community awakened, it was a fight he knew he could face with hope and dignity intact.